9:26, September 1st, 1939, Lower East Side, New York City. The late summer air hangs thick and humid. Gray clouds press down on the city. A breeze from the East River carries the mingled scents of garbage and freshly baked bread. On the damp sidewalks, newsboys hawk the daily news. Germany attacks Poland. The shouted headline echoes down the street, like a stone dropped into a silent well. People pause, glance up, then continue on their way. No sirens wail. No draft notices arrive. In America, the war still feels distant, a world away. Inside a small, family-owned shoe shop, the elderly proprietor turns on the radio. The announcer speaks rapidly, reporting from Warsaw, describing the roar of battleship guns at dawn. But here, in this corner of New York, anxieties revolve around more immediate concerns. The rent, the rising cost of meat, the struggle to find steady work. The Great Depression hasn't fully loosened its grip on the nation. Americans have endured a decade of debt layoffs and pervasive worry. They don't want a new, imported terror from Europe. On the shop wall hangs a faded photograph. A young man in a World War I uniform, lost and dead somewhere near the Argonne forest. The photo remains silent, yet it remembers. It remembers America, saving the world once before, only to return to overflowing cemeteries and a mountain of unpaid bills. Throughout the 1930s, the Senate's Nye Committee argued that the greed of bankers and arms manufacturers had helped to drag the U.S. into the previous conflict, a sentiment echoed in many historical accounts of the interwar period. The resulting reflex is deeply ingrained. Don't get pulled in again. In Washington, lawmakers have already constructed a barrier. The Neutrality Acts of 1935, 1936, and 1937, later revised in 1939, prohibit arms sales to warring nations, forbid loans, restrict American ships from entering war zones, and enforce cash and carry. Belligerents must pay in cash and transport the goods themselves. These laws are more than just words on paper. They are chains binding the president's hands and a solemn promise from the voters. America will stay out of the war. President Franklin D. Roosevelt studies those laws as if they were an imposing wall. He understands that Nazi Germany is not just another faraway dispute, but he also knows he cannot breach that wall while the public continues to press against him. In the autumn of 1939, the majority of Americans opposed direct involvement, even as many hope for a victory for Britain and France, as polling data demonstrates. Therefore, Roosevelt opts for a series of carefully calculated detours, aiding the Allies incrementally, without explicitly declaring war. Each detour becomes a tug-of-war. In November 1939, he pushes Congress to permit arms sales under the cash-and-carry provision. American goods begin to flow across the Atlantic. Yet, this remains commerce, not alliance. Officially, the U.S. maintains its neutrality. At sea, however, that neutrality is already beginning to unravel. In an Ohio diner, a young man unfolds a flyer from the America First Committee. Do not send our boys to die in Europe. This is the largest anti-war movement in the country, boasting approximately 800,000 members. They organize rallies, display banners, and feature Charles Lindbergh as a prominent speaker. They argue that America is safe behind its two vast oceans. They assert that even if Britain falls, America will endure. They claim that Roosevelt is subtly leading the nation into a trap, a core tenet of the AFC's public stance. Roosevelt hears their voices. He doesn't respond with aggression. He responds with strategic timing. He gradually rebuilds the military. He increases naval budgets. He lays the groundwork for the arsenal of democracy. But he must frame his actions in terms of defense, not crusading. Your boys are not going to be sent into any foreign wars, he pledges during the 1940 presidential campaign. That promise secures his re-election. It keeps America on the sidelines for a little while longer. In shipyards at Norfolk and the New York Navy Yard, the cutting of steel still appears to be peacetime work, but the rhythm of the hammers is changing. Old Wicks and Clemson-class destroyers are hauled into dry docks, undergoing renovations for escort duty. On technical drawing boards, planners record familiar specifications of 5-inch/38, 127 millimeters deck guns, a maximum range exceeding 15 kilometers, a practical firing rate of approximately 15 to 22 rounds per minute with a well-trained crew, all according to standard specifications. These numbers haven't yet been tested in actual combat, but they reveal a stark truth. America is preparing for a battle it still claims it won't fight. Early in 1940, the war in Europe escalates faster than anticipated. Germany conquers Denmark and Norway. Then France collapses. The devastating news hits American dinner tables like a physical blow. Americans may not embrace war, but they certainly fear a bloody Atlantic. Public sentiment gradually shifts toward providing more assistance to Britain, while still resisting the deployment of troops. In September 1940, Roosevelt trades 50 aging destroyers for British bases in the Atlantic. The America First Committee protests vehemently, but the deal is executed under executive authority. It represents another step away from neutrality, though not yet a declaration of war. That night, September 1st, 1939, the New York shoe shop owner locks up his store. He glances at the headline one last time. He harbors no animosity toward Poland. He feels no admiration for Hitler. But he remembers the Argonne Forest and the lean years that followed his return home. He shakes his head. Not our business. This sentiment is not his alone. It is the voice of a generation scarred by the previous war and battered by the Depression. The initial wave of isolationism forms in this way. War arrives at the world's doorstep, and America bolts its doors shut with laws, memories, fear of poverty, and a deep-seated suspicion of being manipulated. Roosevelt begins to loosen those bolts one by one, but he cannot yet break down the door entirely. On the surface, America remains aloof. Beneath the surface, it is already preparing for the moment when standing aside becomes an impossibility. 5/18, March 11th, 1941, the U.S. Capital, Washington, D.C. A late winter wind whips across the National Mall. The marble steps are slick with mist. Inside the House chamber, the air is stifling. Men are packed tightly together, shoulder to shoulder. Papers rustle like a flock of startled birds. The Lend-Lease bill comes to a vote. It empowers the president to lend or lease arms to nations whose defense is deemed vital to the United States. It avoids the words allies. It avoids the word war. But the rhetoric has reached a new level. When the electronic board lights up with the vote in favor, Roosevelt received the act as if it were a key. He tells an aide, only half joking, "Now we can send bullets without explaining every bullet." Lend-Lease opens American stockpiles to Britain, and soon after, to the Soviet Union and China. By the end of the war, the total value of aid will reach tens of billions of dollars in 1940s currency. But on March 11th, it serves as a public picklock, circumventing the constraints of legal neutrality. Outside the Capitol, the America First Committee protests loudly. A man holds a sign, Lend-Lease equals Lend War. They are not wrong about the underlying sentiment. They are wrong about the timing. The ocean itself is dictating the timing for Roosevelt. By April 1941, the Atlantic's complexion is changing, marred by waves and the wreckage of sunken ships. German U-boats intensify their attacks on convoys. British ships are being lost at an alarming rate. Churchill's reserves dwindle to the point where he is compelled to write to Roosevelt repeatedly, pleading for assistance. Roosevelt sees the situation with stark clarity. If Britain falls, America will stand alone against a hostile continent. He begins to draw the U.S. Navy into the gray area of undeclared war. 9:40, May 27th, 1941, North Atlantic, a few hundred miles from Iceland. The sea is frigid, the color of slate, with long, rolling swells that resemble the backs of whales. The destroyer USS Niblack pitches and rolls violently. On deck, the 5-inch/38, 127 millimeters. Guns swing into position on command. With a maximum range exceeding 15 kilometers and a practical firing rate of 15 to 22 rounds per minute, the 127s are not targeting surface ships today. They are targeting shadows lurking beneath the waves. A merchant ship has reported a torpedo strike. The Niblack races to the scene and drops depth charges. USMK 7 depth charges can be set to detonate at various depths. A pattern is released, erupting in geysers that punch violently into the sky. It marks the first time a U.S. ship attacks a U-boat, even while America still clings to the pretense of neutrality, an event noted as the first such clash in some historical accounts. The news sends a jolt through Washington. Congress does not declare war, but the sea does not wait for Congress. Roosevelt takes further action. In June 1941, he orders naval escorts to Iceland and expands a neutrality patrol zone deep into the Atlantic. He authorizes U.S. ships to relay U-boat positions to the British. He avoids calling it belligerence. He calls it forward defense. But for the sailors on deck, labels are irrelevant. They are now squarely in the line of fire. 1727, September 4th, 1941, near Greenland. Evening falls early. Fog blankets the horizon. The destroyer, USS Greer, zigzags through the water. Sonar pings pulse inside the hull like an electric heartbeat. A sonar officer detects propeller noise below. A U-boat is stalking them. The Greer drops depth charges. The U-boat responds by firing torpedoes. The torpedoes miss their mark. No ship is hit, but something significant has been struck. This is genuine combat. Roosevelt addresses the nation on the radio a few days later. He announces a shoot-on-sight policy. U.S. ships will engage any German warship found within protection zone. The old legal boundaries have been shattered. The United States has not yet declared war, but has authorized the first shots to be fired. In a Chicago apartment, a mother listens to the speech. Her son is undergoing training at the Great Lakes Naval Station. She clutches a photograph of him in his crisp new sailor uniform, smiling shyly. She doesn't want him to go to sea. But as she studies a map in the newspaper, she begins to understand that the sea has now come to her doorstep. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, another source of tension is escalating. Japan has been at war in China since 1937 and is now pushing into Indochina, threatening British and Dutch colonies. The U.S. responds with economic pressure, imposing embargoes on scrap iron, and then, in July 1941, an oil embargo. Japan relies on imported oil for more than 80% of its supply. The embargo is like a vice tightening around its throat, according to standard estimates. In Tokyo, admirals are counting the days. Without oil, the fleet will die in harbor. They opt for a different course of action, a preemptive strike to secure access to Southeast Asian oil reserves. But to strike south, they must neutralize the U.S. Pacific Fleet Station in Hawaii. All roads are now converging on a single point. At home, the political divisions remain sharp. The America First Committee still wields considerable influence. Yet, after Germany invades the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, even many who were previously opposed to war begin to view Germany as a global threat. Support for aid increases. Neutrality now feels like a coat that no longer fits properly. It maintains its shape, but the seams are tearing apart. On the night of October 15, 1941, the USS Carney is torpedoed off the coast of Iceland. 11 American sailors lose their lives. Roosevelt reads a casualty list in the Oval Office and sets down his pipe. He remains silent for an unusually long time. American blood has been spilled in a war that America still claims to be outside of. That contradiction cannot endure indefinitely. The second wave of events culminates here. America is being drawn in by two oceans. In the Atlantic, it is exchanging fire without a formal declaration of war. In the Pacific, the embargo is pushing Japan toward a desperate gamble. At home, the trauma of World War I and the fear of economic hardship continue to pull the nation toward staying out, but reality is now dictating that it cannot stay out. 7:55, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, Oahu, Hawaii. The morning is unusually clear. A blue sky, a bright sun reflecting off water as smooth as glass. The Ko'olau Range stands hazy beneath a light mist. In the harbor, the USS Arizona rests silently, its gray paint appearing dull, its mast standing erect, the colors not yet raised for the Sunday ceremony. A Navy band is preparing for flag-raising ritual. The trumpets have not yet sounded, but the war has already begun. The first sound is not a siren. It is a low, steady drone like a swarm of metallic bees. Japanese aircraft descend in waves. Nakajima B-5 and Kate. Torpedo bombers skim the surface of the water and release Type 91 torpedoes. Each torpedo measures approximately 8 meters in length, carries a warhead of around 205 kilograms, and is equipped with stabilizing fins to enable it to run in the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor, all according to standard specifications. White wakes cut through the harbor like knives. Sailors aboard the USS Oklahoma spot the wakes too late. Torpedo port side crackles across the deck. A pattern of torpedoes strikes. The ship lists sharply, then rolls over. Below deck, men desperately pound on steel bulkheads, searching for a way out. Air is rapidly running out. No one inside has time to think about politics or embargoes. They have time only for one more breath. On the Arizona, an armor-piercing bomb plummets down near the forward ammunition magazines. The Japanese bombs used in this attack were roughly 800 kilograms weapons, modified from naval shells to penetrate armored decks, according to common studies. The resulting explosion tears open the sky. The magazines detonate in a chain reaction. The Arizona erupts in a towering inferno, then rapidly sinks, taking more than 1,000 men with it in a matter of minutes. Across the entire attack, approximately 2,400 Americans are killed and over 1,100 wounded. Japan loses roughly 29 aircraft and a handful of midget submarines, according to standard tallies. At Hickam Field, a young U.S. pilot sprints toward a P-40 Warhawk that hasn't even been fully armed yet. He climbs into the cockpit as bombs explode behind him. The P-40 is equipped with 6 50-inch 12 7mm Browning machine guns, each capable of firing approximately 750 to 800 rounds per minute. But today, the rate of fire is less important than simply getting airborne. He slams the throttle forward. The Warhawk bounces over debris and lifts off into the smoke-filled sky. He spots a Japanese plane sliding across his sights and fires. Red tracer rounds find their mark. The enemy plane crashes into the sea. There's no time to celebrate. The sky remains filled with danger. Near the docks, a Navy nurse named Nora, a fictional character, bandages a sailor who has suffered severe burns. His skin peels away like wet paper. He clutches her sleeve and whispers, "They really hit us?" Nora doesn't respond with political analysis. She simply says, "Breathe, look at me." She counts his breaths, sensing the nation's breath returning under the weight of the shock. The reversal of fortune requires no vote. It occurs in the bright Hawaiian sunlight and amidst the thick black smoke of burning oil. 12:30 that day, Washington, D.C. A soft gray sky, a light rain falling. Phones ring incessantly in the White House. Roosevelt receives reports in fragments. Battleships sunk, aircraft burning, casualties mounting. He doesn't shout. He doesn't pound the desk. He simply instructs his secretary. Prepare the speech. 1310, December 8th, Congress. Roosevelt stands at the microphone. He begins with a sentence that will become etched in memory. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. He requests a declaration of war against Japan. Congress approves it almost unanimously. America crosses the final line. 3 days later, on December 11th, Germany and Italy declare war on the United States. America reciprocates. The era of standing outside comes to an abrupt end on both fronts. The war that America had attempted to avoid with laws, slogans, and oceans now surges directly into its national narrative. In retrospect, America's initial stance of non-intervention was not born of cowardice. It was a product of memory and strategic calculation. The memory of World War I warned that early involvement led to graves and debt. Geography suggested that 2 oceans provided a natural defense. Depression-era economics prioritized survival at home. Democracy dictated that a president could not move faster than his constituents. But all these factors shared a common blind spot. When war becomes global, oceans cease to be protective barriers and instead become highways for conflict. Pearl Harbor obliterates that blind spot. It transforms debate into instinct, aid without war into war without delay. Lend-Lease ceases to be a legal workaround and instead becomes a foundation for a massive production effort. American factories transition to 3 shifts. Liberty ships roll off the assembly lines like fabric. M4 Sherman tanks, 105 millimeters howitzers, B-24 bombers, and P-51 fighters glide down the production lines. The arsenal of democracy is now operating at full capacity. The strategic consequence is a shift in global power dynamics. The United States moves from a position of semi-isolation to become the linchpin of a global coalition. It opens fronts in North Africa, Italy, and Normandy. It carries the primary burden of the Pacific War, island hopping its way toward Japan. Without this intervention, Europe might remain under German control for a much longer period. The Pacific might have remained Japan's private domain. The post-1945 world order, the United Nations, NATO, a U.S.-led trade system, emerges from the ashes of Pearl Harbor. The doctrinal legacy is equally profound. America learns that pure neutrality cannot survive in an era defined by long-range air power, submarines, and economic warfare. It develops a new security paradigm. Forward defense, alliance structures, a permanent defense industry. From that point forward, Congress and presidents will assess every crisis with the question, if we wait until we're hit, will there be enough time? The enduring legacy is also found in smaller, more personal things. A letter scorched in the pocket of an Arizona sailor. A family photograph recovered from beneath the deck of the Oklahoma. A siren that never had the opportunity to sound on that fateful Sunday. These fragments bring history down to a human scale. As the sun sets on December 7th, oil continues to burn in long, black streaks across the harbor. But across the mainland, a new tempo has already begun. The tempo of a nation with no remaining option to stand aside. That tempo will drive the next half-century, leaving behind one enduring question. Sometimes, proceeding slowly is rational, until someone kicks the door down.